In this video, we are going to go through a game between White, who is rated 2000, against a 1500 player. So there's a gap of about 500 rating. This is not a game between grandmasters. So why are we going to look at this game? So when we want to improve, although it's important to go through master games, it's also important to understand the kind of typical mistakes lower rated players make. Make sure such mistakes are avoided as much as possible. So the game starts with e4. White plays e4, c6, Caro-Kann defense, which is a very solid opening for black. d4, d5. The advanced variation of the Caro-Kann. The difference between this and the French is that in the French, the pawn is already on e6, but in the Caro-Kann, before the pawn moves to e6, the bishop can move out. Knight e2, knight g3. The knight attacks the bishop. Although we learned that the knight and bishop are roughly equal, in most positions the bishops are better, unless there's a special reason to preserve the knight over the bishop. It's always advisable to preserve the bishop. So black moves the bishop to g6, which is the right move. h4 attacks, plans to attack the bishop on g6 by playing h5. Black plays h5, which is the correct move. White continues with bishop to e2. This is a critical position, and if you look at the center, the pawns are blocked. There is a pawn chain in the center. The pawns on e5 and d4 makes it impossible for the black pawns on e6 and d5 to advance any further. So we say the center is blocked or closed. And look how far the pawns have advanced. White has a pawn on the 5th rank from his side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th rank. Whereas black has only been able to move a pawn to the 4th rank. 1, 2, 3, 4. What it means is White has more room to move his pieces behind his pawns. So White's territory is larger, whilst black is kind of restricted behind black's pawn structure. Black's territory is smaller. That means White has what we call a space advantage, which allows his pieces to freely move on the king side. The space advantage is mainly on the king side and in the center, whereas black will struggle to find active squares for the pieces. So if black lets white continue to have the pawn structure throughout the game, white will have an advantage on the king side. Possibly white will be able to make use of this advantage to launch an attack on the king side by moving white's pieces to this area and have what we call a superiority of forces on the king side. That means white will have more forces, more pieces than black on the king side, allowing white to attack black's king side. So that means castling king side might be a bit risky. And one of the ways of tackling such a pawn chain was introduced by the great chess theoretician Nimzowitsch long time ago, almost 100 years ago, in his famous book My System, where he mentioned that the pawn chain should be attacked at its base first. So here the base of the pawn chain is d4, which supports white's pawn on e5. So in this particular variation of the Karokan, the advanced variation, and many sub-variations, c5 is almost always is a correct move very early in the game. It not only attacks white's base and challenges white's pawn chain, but also makes the c6 square free for the knight. c6 is the most natural development square for the black's queen knight. Now up to this point it's theory. Now white is threatening to capture this pawn on h5. It's attacked by 3 pieces and defended only by 2 pieces. So black plays bishop e7. Now black deviates from theory. This is the first mistake black makes. Black's idea is if white takes h pawn, black in turn would take white's h pawn, so that the game would be material even. But the problem is this: black doesn't do anything to free up the position. Almost always the correct move here is c5. Let's see what would have happened. Black should have just ignored the threat on the h5 pawn, and black should have played c5. Let's see what would happen if white just goes ahead and captures the h5 pawn. Let's look at knight takes h5. Knight takes h5. C takes d4. Black wins white's d pawn, and white cannot capture this because then white would lose a piece. Black is a piece up. So white has to take the knight to safety. Knight f4, attacking the bishop on g6. Bishop e4. Now black is threatening to win back the h pawn. h5, knight c6 on e5. Black has the upper hand here, or even black has a decisive advantage according to computer engines. Look at this position. Black is superior in the center. Although black might eventually lose the d pawn, it's not going to be lost without a fight. And white might even lose the pawn on e5. So what has happened? What has happened to white's pawn chain, the dominating pawn chain? D pawn is gone and e pawn may not survive for long. So when the d and e pawns are removed from the board, white will not have any center pawns. It's only black that has center pawns. So once black completes development, black can advance these pawns, dominating white's center. If a side can dominate the center, that side does not have to worry about flank attacks because center control far more superior than a flank attack. So black could get a decisive advantage due to the control of the center. What if after c5 white takes bishop takes h5, then bishop takes h5, knight takes h5, once again c takes d4. The pawn on d4 is immune from capture by the queen. Bishop g5, queen b6 defends the pawn. Knight d2, focusing on development and giving up the b2 pawn. Black need not go after pawns in the opening, but black should just focus on completing development. Knight d7, knight b3. Here trying to save this with f4 would be a blunder because it traps the bishop. If white plays bishop f4 here to protect the pawn on e5, black can reply rook c8, castle, knight e7, Knight b3, knight f5. Black's pieces develop pretty fast. g3, bishop e7, q1, g6. Knight has nowhere to go but f6, knight f6, e6, bishop f6. And black has the advantage due to the cluster of pawns in the center and absolute domination in the center. So after c5, what can white play? The most likely scenario is c3. Typical move when playing with the pawn chain, when the d4 base is attacked by a pawn, it is supported with another pawn. So c takes d4 can be replied with c takes d4 with one pawn replacing another pawn but preserving the base of the pawn chain. Of course, this base is weaker than the previous base, which could be supported by a pawn. But at least the base is preserved. So c5, c3, this is actually the main line. This is where the majority of the master games have gone. Knight c6, putting more pressure on the base. Bishop e3, defending it. Queen b6. See, this is the strategic square where black is attacking d4 and white is defending d4. So, Queen b3, c4. This is the main line, and black has a very comfortable position, and we can even say black has the upper hand. So bishop e7 here is a mistake. One reason is it doesn't follow the typical plan that black should follow. Black should fight white's pawn chain and the space it gives. And now white obviously takes a pawn on h5, and it leads to a very forced variation. And I think it's better to avoid these forced sequence of moves in the opening. Unless they give you an advantage. First focus on completing your development. These are all forced. Yeah. Now white has the upper hand thanks to the space that white enjoys on the king side. What else? Something else also has happened. Let's look at the unique nature of black's pawn structure. Black has 7 pawns, 6 of them are on light squares. That means these pawns can only protect light squares. These pawns cannot protect dark squares. That means black has a dark square weakness. Black's dark squares are pretty much unprotected or cannot be protected even if black wants to by pawns. So it's really important for black to preserve this dark squared bishop, which can to some extent compensate for this lack of pawn protection on dark squares. Black should try not to trade this bishop. Here white plays queen d3, replied with knight a6. Knights are never well placed on the edge of the board. Once again, if you look at this position, black has several problems. So at each stage of the game, you should come up with a list of things you should do, not moves, but rather a list of goals you need to accomplish. The main things black should do would be to complete development, that is to get the knights out, improve the queen position, and then get the king to safety, ideally castle, as quickly as possible. So what's the best way to achieve it? Believe it or not, in this position also, the best move is once again c5. So what this says is, with this pawn structure, the c5 must almost always be considered as a candidate move. It's true that it somewhat opens the position, but then it makes this very important square available for this knight. And it gives black some space on the queen side. c5, let's calculate some variation. c5, pawn takes pawn. Black gets a very comfortable position. After queen c7, queen's position is improved. And the queen threatens to capture the e5 pawn, which would be, if white were to lose the pawn, then like black gets a complete control of the center. White would not have any center pawn left, and the pawn chain, white's pawn chain, part of the pawn chain would have got totally destroyed. So white cannot allow that. Queen e3, bishop e7, a very strong threat. Bishop takes c5 is a threat. Knight d3, knight a6, now knight takes c5 is threatened. Knight b4 seems to be the natural defense, but then there is an interesting knight sacrifice. Knight b4, knight takes b4, bishop c5, forking the queen and the knight. Of course, the queen can defend it with a move like this, but then the queen will get attacked. g5, queen doesn't really seem to have a square to go to, because if queen g4, this is deadly. Not only white loses the e5 pawn, the important e5 pawn, white loses the rook as well. c5. So here, queen b5 check. Nothing to worry about, just knight d7. You can sacrifice the pawn because black gets total control of the center, and black can recover the pawn very quickly as well. c8, threatening to trap the black is threatening to trap the white queen with rook a8, 4, rook b4, queen a3, rook takes d4. So if you look at the position, white has 6 pawns, black has only 5. So black is a pawn down, but black is totally dominating the center with so many threats. White is so far behind in development. d2, rook b4. Yeah. So although white has more pawns, yeah, black should be able to make this development advantage and center count and convert it to a winning advantage. Let's look at knight g6. Why is this sacrifice not possible now? King d7. Black king can safely escape. c4, trying to open up the position so that the king would be exposed to attacks. But unfortunately, even if lines get opened up, white doesn't have pieces to deal. Black has all the pieces around the king now. Queen h7 attacking the bishop. The bishop can even be sacrificed here. The bishop seems to be trapped here, but black does not have to worry about the bishop because black already has an extra piece. Black can just complete the development. And if queen takes bishop, knight takes, knight a3 to prevent the fork on c2, queen h8, takes, b3, rook h1, f1. Black recovers the pawn with the advantage. So after knight c6, c takes d5, knight d4, once again threatening the fork on c2, d takes e6 check, king c6, queen h4, knight c2 check, king e2, queen d4, queen d4, c d4. Black is winning because white cannot save the rook. The second main mistake is by black is knight a6. In both the places where black made mistakes, the correct move was c5. That is why with these pawn chains, c5 is almost always a correct move. Never forget to consider it as at least a candidate move. Now, slowly but surely, black's position crumbles. c3. Black is struggling to free up the position. White has absolute total domination on the king side. With the space, black cannot free up the position. The knights are very inactive, either undeveloped or on the edge of the board. The queen is still on the original square. The king has not castled. Queen d7 with the right intention of castling at a3. Okay, now black is just one move away from castling. Bishop e7. Probably the right move, getting the bishop where it belongs with all the dark square weaknesses. From e7, bishop can protect them and attacking the knight on a3, but for the moment black should not consider giving up the bishop for the knight, even if it means breaking up white's pawn structure, because it's really important to preserve this bishop on e7. Knight c2. Now it's just a matter of castling queenside, and black would have at least solved one of the problems. King d8. That almost looks like a mouse slip, but this was played on actual physical board. It's not a mouse slip, it's an intentional move. It's unbelievable. Okay, let's look at the reasoning behind that. The king has to go to safety, but where is it safe? e8 and d8, I don't see much of a difference. Maybe f8 would be a little bit better. I don't think the king is any better on d8 than when it was on e8. So why not castle? Apparently, black was concerned that white could launch a pawn storm. Is it something to fear? I doubt it. Because white does not have any advantage on the queen side. White doesn't have any space on the queen side. White has not even completed development. White's advantage or space is in the king side. Black could, if black is concerned, black could easily move the king to b8 and move the rook to c8. And still proceed with the natural plan of c5, because it's white's king who is stuck in the middle now. And moving the king to the queen side also gives black the opportunity to move the pawns. First move the pawn to g5, chase the knight away, and also move the pawn away from g6 where it's attacked by both the queen and the knight. And then later, while the knight is no longer on f4, move f6 and attack the top of the pawn chain. This could be coupled by first attacking the base as recommended by Nimzo, which weaken the base with the exchange of pawns here. Move the king to b8 for extra safety, followed by rook c8. And with the base weakened, attack the pawn chain at the top with f6 and complete destroy white's pawn chain. Open up lines, free up the two pawns, e6 and d5, possibly advancing them, and white's king has nowhere to go. It's white who will struggle to save the game. This, I would say, is a positional blunder. Hereafter, it's really difficult for black to recover the game. Bishop d2, c5. This was finally played, and It is the correct move. Even in this position, c5 is the correct move. It's true. The king is very much exposed here without the ability to castle, but still c5 is the correct move. b3. Probably white was a bit concerned about something like c4, totally blocking the center. Rook c8, a good move. So if you look at these two moves by black, finally, after making so many mistakes, black is finally playing correctly. c5, b3, rook c8, a very good move. With just two moves, black can castle artificially. King c7 followed by king b8. Black's king would be quite safe. And white's rook would be very active on a potentially open or semi-open c5. Rook c1, yeah. White realizes that and rushes the rook to c1. Queen c7. Aimless moving back and forth. Queen c7, aimless moving back and forth. Instead c takes d4. Here c takes d4 does not work because of knight b4, which is pretty strong. With absolute equality. And what if c takes d4, knight takes d4? This is not ideal because the base is destroyed now. The pawn chain does not have a base anymore. This is quite weak now. Knight c5. Knight gets an ideal square. Queen e3. And now it's time to artificially castle. King c7. White can try to desperately open up the position, but black can escape in time, giving an absolutely even position. Queen c7. This is probably black's losing move. Queen h3, queen d7, too late. The knight never moved. Queen e8. Yeah. c4. Now the king is in the middle. White correctly opens up the lines. Once the d and c files opens up, the game would be over. D takes c4, b takes c4. This is a mistake. White could have immediately finished the game with d5, breaking through in the center. Allowing d6 would be catastrophic. So black has to capture. Knight takes d5, c takes b3. White does not have to worry about pawns. Check, b6, rook d1, winning the game. So white missed the opportunity of finishing off. C takes d4, knight takes d4. The delay from white's side allowed black one more chance to escape. Here, king c7 would have allowed black to obtain absolute equality. Knight b5, check. Black doesn't have to worry anything. King b8, artificially castled. Black is safe. White's king is not safe. Now, another thing that has happened in this variation is a c4 is an isolated pawn. As most of you know, the square in front of the isolated pawn is an outpost for the opponent's knight because there are no adjacent pawns here that could attack it. So knight c5 would have given black a very strong position. So white should rush to trade it off. Knight c5, knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, but still bishop blocks the pawn and the bishop is quite strong there. Knight d6 is allowed, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight f6. Finally, the knight develops with a tempo, attacking the queen. Queen h4, queen h8, trades, king e2, rook h5, c5, rook d5. It's true that this is a protected pass pawn on the 6th rank, but it's kind of too far advanced, and white will struggle to defend these pawns because black can easily use the king to blockade them on light squares which cannot be attacked by white, as white lacks a knight or a bishop that moves along the light squares. Anyway, unfortunately, this was the last nail in black's coffin. Bishop a3. An absolute positional blunder. Apparently, the aim of this move was to trade the bishop for the knight, which is a wrong decision in the first place, because although the knight is strong, his bishop is crucial to protect the dark squares. So black was hoping that after knight's king, rook c3, bishop b2, probably the knight would be traded, but let's look at the variation like this. Yeah, the king can escape. Probably this was black's idea, but white need not even worry about the rook. This wins immediately. Yeah, if the king goes here, this is winning. This is too strong. I think it's checkmate. Yeah, this is checkmate. a3. Anyway, it doesn't work tactically, but even positionally, this is a mistake. Rook c3. So black finally realizes that. Rook c7. Rook takes a3. Queen e5 check. q3. King e2, knight f6 attacks the queen. Queen h8 check. King b7, knight d5. The knight on f6 is pinned. Queen d8, king c5, knight f6, knight e4 with an easy win. Neither side made blunders. Black actually did not make any blunders. So an analysis using chess.com, the new review feature gives black's performance at about 1650. Positional mistakes led to the downfall. This shows what someone around 1500 should improve in order to reach the next level. This is not grandmaster chess, but by focusing on these mistakes, one should be able to make steady progress from 1500 to the next levels.